I knew the moment Brent Halverson asked for an all-hands meeting on a Monday morning that something was coming. The man never wasted a crowd unless he wanted an audience. He stood at the head of the conference table, flanked by Evander Lynn and two people from legal I didn't recognize, clean suits, no emotion. The kind of faces you bring when you want deniability. The room was packed. Engineering leads data scientists, ops, even a few junior hires, lined along the back wall like extras in a bad courtroom drama. I took my usual seat across from the screen, opened my tablet, and waited for the performance to begin. Brent cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining on short notice." He began fake warmth, frosting his voice like icing over rot. "As you know, we've been undergoing a strategic review following our acquisition by Orvix Capital." A few people nodded. Most just looked confused. To align with our new trajectory, some organizational shifts are required. Effective immediately, Melis Dorn's role as Chief Systems Architect is terminated. Silence dropped like glass shattering. My name echoed in the back of the room, whispered once, then swallowed by tension. No explanation. No thanks for years of building the system they sold to investors as the future of predictive logistics. Just that. Terminated. I didn't flinch. I closed my tablet, slid it gently into my bag, and stood. Brent was already reaching for a folder, the standard severance package, probably pre-signed and printed before I arrived. He pushed it across the glass table like it was a favor. I didn't take it. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a plain white envelope, my own. I placed it on the table directly in front of him. "You'll want to read this before your investors call." I said, my voice even. Brent blinked, uncertain. Evander leaned in. Across the room, heads turned. No one moved, not even to breathe. I stepped back, nodded once, and walked out past my team, past the interns, past the open-mouthed director of engineering who used to call me irreplaceable. The elevator dinged as I pressed the button. Behind me, someone finally exhaled. I didn't turn around. I had timed it perfectly. As the door slid shut, I glanced at my watch. 8 minutes. I never looked back as the elevator carried me to the ground floor. The envelope would be opened within 60 seconds. Brent was too arrogant not to, and when he did, the first domino would fall. By the time I stepped outside, the spring chill slapped against my face, crisp and grounding. I walked slowly down the block, pulled out my phone, and opened a secure dashboard only I could access. A thin black screen flickered to life, showing the live status of Etherion's infrastructure. Everything was green, still up. For now. Inside the envelope, Brent would find a certified legal document citing Clause 7, 9 of the proprietary code agreement, a clause no one paid attention to because I had buried it under generic language. I called it the Disputed Ownership Contingency Lock. If my credentials were revoked without negotiated release and attribution, the system would trigger a silent fail-safe. Nothing malicious, nothing destructive, just silence. As I passed the coffee shop across from the building, the dashboard pinged. 1, 2, 3 systems turned amber, then red. The neural forecasting engine went dark first. The API gateway that fed live shipment predictions began returning null. Auto response alerts fired to government clients. A second ping, then 10. I paused at the corner. Someone on the top floor would be opening Slack to find a cascade of outage reports. Someone else would try to access the model trainer and get denied. Engineers would scramble for logs that no longer existed, only to realize the metadata had evaporated with my clearance. They'd think it was sabotage. It wasn't. It was preservation. I didn't destroy anything. I simply withdrew the keys to the kingdom they thought they'd stolen. Another alert chimed. Client portal offline. Data warehouse inaccessible. Systems self-neutralizing. By the time I reached the end of the block, I could already feel the panic rippling through glass. Someone would be yelling. Someone else calling legal. The thing they didn't understand yet was that it wasn't an attack. It was a boundary, and I had drawn it 6 months ago. The first time I noticed it was a folder I couldn't open. It had been weeks after Orvix finalized the acquisition. My clearance level hadn't changed on paper. But suddenly, the model weights folder for Horizon 3, the neural forecasting engine I designed, was restricted. A red access denial message flickered like a warning I wasn't meant to see. I flagged it to IT. They told me it was a glitch. The second time I was left off a white paper that referenced my own optimization protocol. My subroutines were quoted directly verbatim lines of my code, but the credit was attributed to the core research team. No names, no footnotes, just a disappearing act, a quiet one. I knew what it meant. Soon after, during a late-night debugging session, I found a print job left in the tray. A confidential memo from Brent labeled Internal only outlined the rebranding strategy for Ethereum's flagship IP. The memo spoke in vague business speak, streamline innovation channels, transition to a unified credit model, prepare for outside licensing. But the target was clear. In the appendix was a bullet point roadmap to transition architectural ownership from M. Dorn to K. Whitmore. Kippas, a 26-year-old junior engineer with a freshly laminated MBA and 3 months of field experience. I had trained him. I'd even defended him when he bungled a routine production push. Now they were handing him my legacy. A week later, I accessed the internal IP logs. The audit trail was unmistakable. My name had been manually removed from 5 core files in the Horizon Engine repository. In the pending patent registration for our sequencing algorithm, I'd been replaced with team consensus authoring. I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being erased. That night, I didn't sleep. I copied every log. I backed up every commit. I encrypted and timestamped the documents, stored them offline, and created 3 redundancies. Then I opened the system kernel, and I started writing the clause that would end it all the moment they believed they no longer needed me. I'd heard it before, no one's irreplaceable. It was something managers said when they wanted you scared enough to be obedient, but too proud to leave. I never believed it, especially not in a company like Ethereum where half the infrastructure was built by Ghost's nameless contributors who were pushed out the moment their equity vested. I wasn't going to be one of them. The week after I found the memo, I began embedding my signature deeper than metadata. Not watermarks, not comments, real structural identifiers. Framework-level conditions that responded only to authenticated credentials registered to one ID mine. Every core module had a dependency keyed to my profile. Every node handshake, every pipeline, every predictive inference batch was quietly wrapped in recursive security layers. No alarms, no warnings, just code that knew who built it. It was delicate work. One misstep and they'd notice, but they didn't. They were too busy grooming Kip, too eager for press releases. I had time. I used every minute of it. And I didn't stop at the system. I contacted a legal partner I trusted, Callan, a former classmate turned corporate litigator. He helped me draft a contingency claim of authorship backed by timestamped source logs and internal memos. It sat in escrow sealed and notarized, just waiting for an action trigger. That trigger was today. Now from my apartment window overlooking the city, I watched it unfold on my secure dashboard. I'd built the monitoring system as a side project, bare bones, no fluff. It pulsed red and yellow like a hospital triage board. Forecasting down, API integrations failing, client portal unreachable. Each one lit up in real time and I could practically hear the shouting through the fiber lines. They were scrambling, and I was still. I sipped tea and watched a debug log roll past. Someone had tried to force a kernel override, failed authentication, then another, then 4 more from different IPs. They were trying to break in, and they had no idea the locks they were rattling didn't even exist when I first started at Ethereum. I designed them after, when I realized exactly what they were willing to do. It was just after 8 when the knock came 3 sharp raps against the wood too firm to be friendly. I didn't move at first. Let them wait. They'd let me rot in a room full of coworkers without a word. They could stand in the hallway for 60 seconds and consider what that felt like. Another knock, this one faster, lighter. A second hand. I stood, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door halfway. Brent Halverson looked like he'd aged 10 years since this morning. His shirt was wrinkled, tie-gone collar, sweat-stained. Behind him stood Evander Lynn, normally polished to the last cufflink, now looking like he'd crawled out of a server rack. Mayless Brent began forcing something close to sincerity. "Hey, can we talk?" I stepped aside without a word. They entered like kids called to the principal's office shoulders, low eyes scanning the space like it might collapse. Evander spoke first. "We know the system isn't down by accident." I said nothing. Brent stepped forward. "Whatever this is, whatever happened, let's resolve it. Quietly." I raised an eyebrow. "Now you want quiet?" He winced. I walked to my desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, and returned. "This isn't sabotage," I said, handing the page to Evander. "It's a safeguard, triggered by your poor decisions." Evander read, then paled. Brent tried to read over his shoulder. "It's not broken," I added. "It's doing exactly what I built it to do, resist theft." Brent stiffened. "You're calling this theft, I'm calling it attempted erasure. You just weren't subtle enough." He looked ready to argue, but Evander grabbed his arm. "Read the last paragraph." They both stared down, scanning. "You're joking," Brent muttered. 50% IP equity, a board seat, and a CTO reinstatement. I said, effective immediately. Also a signed correction acknowledging me as the system's original architect. "You can't be serious. I'm only offering this once." Evander folded the paper, slid it into his jacket. "We'll bring it to the board." I nodded once and opened the door again. Neither of them said thank you, but Brent paused at the threshold, turned back and asked, "Is it salvageable?" I looked him dead in the eye. "It's waiting for you to do the right thing." They didn't call the next morning. That told me more than any voicemail could. Brent was probably pacing in one of the glass boardrooms trying to convince the others I could be bought off with a meaningless title and an apology. Evander, I imagined, was quieter, calculating, remembering every design session I led that he hadn't understood and now couldn't replicate. By noon, a reply came in a formal email from legal, wrapped in polite phrasing and hollow language. "We appreciate your concerns. Open to compromise. Intent to preserve goodwill. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No mention of authorship. No mention of the system's collapse or the client cancellations piling up by the hour." I responded with silence. At 4:13 p.m., they returned to my door. This time, they brought printed terms of their own. "Here's what we're prepared to offer." Evander said, sliding a stapled proposal across my kitchen counter. I read it once. A revised title, Chief Technology Advisor. No equity, no board seat. No mention of intellectual property. A one-time payout of $240,000 in exchange for system reactivation. I looked up. "You think I'm here for severance?" Brent frowned. "We're trying to be reasonable, Mayless." "This isn't reasonable," I said. "It's insulting." Evander stiffened. "What you're asking for 50% IP equity, a board seat, come on. It's extortion." I smiled, not kindly. "No, Evander, it's restitution." He started to speak again, but I raised a hand. "You wanted PulseNet without me? Now you've met PulseNet without me." Brent crossed his arms. "We'll need to escalate." I nodded once. "That's your choice." They left without another word. I didn't move until the door clicked shut. Then I walked back to my laptop, opened the dashboard, and watched as another API node failed to respond. The system was holding, but not for long. Brent thought he had time, but the board had already received a letter I sent that morning, certified, time-stamped, and copied to our 3 largest government clients. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a countdown. The call came just after midnight. Blocked number, no voicemail. I almost let it go, but something in my gut said otherwise. I answered on the 3rd ring. "You're meddling in more than code," the voice said. Male, calm. No accent I could place, but deliberate in tone, like every word had been tested, in courtrooms, before being spoken aloud. "Who is this?" I asked. A pause. "You should walk away. Not everything you wrote belongs to you anymore." The line went dead. I stared at the screen for a moment, then opened my secure trace tool. It wasn't difficult. Whoever called had masked the number through a series of cheap relays, but the pattern was familiar. Too familiar. I'd seen it used once before, buried in a back-end security contract Ethereum signed during acquisition. The trail led to Orvix Capital. I pulled the corporate integration file from my offline archive. Buried in the appendix behind generic shareholder structures and asset summaries was a clause that hadn't raised flags, at the time exclusive reauthorization, rights for software patents under asset reassignment. Translation. If they forced me out and replaced my name, they could sell everything without my signature. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had planned to erase me, then export the system I built. I ran a deeper scan, one I'd built for black box penetration audits. It scraped cached metadata from the firm's patent registrar. 2 applications were pending approval, one in Singapore, the other in Dubai, both for adaptive logistics forecasting architecture. And both submitted 2 days after Brent revoked my access. They were already moving. They'd gambled I wouldn't fight back. Or maybe they assumed I couldn't. I leaned back, exhaled through my nose. It wasn't just about a job anymore. This was an operation. Coordinated, funded, legal on the surface, but rotten underneath. And Brent. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the placeholder. They called the emergency board meeting for 7 a.m., hoping to catch me off balance. I arrived 10 minutes early. The room was dim, just the glow of recessed lights and the jittery anticipation of people who'd heard whispers but didn't know where the cracks were forming. Brent was already there, pacing near the screen, jaw tight. Evander sat rigidly, arms crossed. A few of the other board members nodded as I entered, not out of politeness, out of necessity. I placed the folder on the table. No theatrics, no preamble. Everything you need to know is in there. I said, then stepped back. One by one, they opened the pages. First, the code lineage reports, each line of proprietary code signed with encrypted hashes tied to my credentials. Undeniable authorship time-stamped across 5 years. Next, internal memos recovered from Brent's inbox, outlining plans to transition architecture ownership to a shell entity affiliated with Orvix. And finally, the contract breach notices 3 government clients citing failure to maintain declared leadership roles and threatening regulatory review. But the last page was the one that mattered most, a signed letter from our largest logistics client stating they were suspending negotiations pending my reinstatement. Without me, the deal died. The boardroom fell into silence. Brent stood desperate. "You're letting her blackmail this company. We can renegotiate. We can explain the outages as a third-party system failure." One of the directors, Marion Sayer, shook her head. "Brent, she built the thing. You tried to sell it without her. We need a vote," someone said. It was unanimous. Not a single hand lifted in his favor. Brent's face darkened, but he didn't fight. Not now. He just stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I remained standing. "You wanted to see the system stabilized," I asked quietly. "Reauthorize my access." They did. The screen behind them flickered, slowly filling with green, but I already knew the color wouldn't last. Something else was moving. By noon, the dashboards glowed a cautious green. APIs were syncing. Inference batches were processing. Clients were re-engaging. On paper, Ethereum was stabilizing. But I didn't trust the stillness. It felt too deliberate, like something holding its breath. The email arrived at 12:07 p.m. No subject, no sender. Just one line in the body. "Check your back door." I didn't hesitate. I spun up the diagnostic tool I hadn't touched since the failsafe activated. It was buried 2 layers beneath the live environment, visible only through a legacy port most engineers didn't know still existed. The console blinked once, then began parsing logs. 32 seconds in, I saw it. A ping, small, clean, and foreign. It didn't attempt access. It didn't probe aggressively. It knocked. The coordinates traced back to a node in Belgium, bounced through a South Korean VPN, then a second mask in Morocco. A tri-layer obfuscation, elegant and expensive. This wasn't a teenager in a basement. This was funded. I checked the target. It had hit the same encrypted cluster that held my ownership verification logic. The same one that had frozen the entire system when Brent revoked my clearance. Someone had found it, and they hadn't touched it yet. They wanted me to know they could, that if I didn't cooperate, didn't surrender, they'd finish what Brent started. But this wasn't Brent's game anymore. I locked the console, secured the logs, and initiated Protocol Umbra, an internal lockdown routine I designed for theoretical cyber threats that were now turning tangible. No outside access. All sensitive systems placed into deep cold storage, accessible only through manual verification on isolated hardware. As the process ran, I looked around the server room. The hum of the machines hadn't changed. The lights still pulsed, their slow, familiar rhythm. But I knew better. This wasn't the end of something. It was the signal flare, and I had just been marked. I didn't wait. The moment that foreign ping confirmed what I already suspected, I initiated the Umbra protocol in full. The core architecture folded inward like a fortress, tightening its gates. Every live connection was severed, every credential reset, every shadow port sealed behind multi-factor chains. Only I knew how to unlock. Then I went public. I compiled everything. Trace logs, memo leaks, acquisition timelines, metadata from the offshore patent filings, and packaged them into 3 folders. One was sent to the FBI's Cyber Division, another to the SEC, and the third to every major tech outlet that had ever once asked for a quote about Ethereum's revolutionary forecasting breakthroughs. Within 48 hours, headlines were everywhere. Founder reclaims control after corporate coup. Attempt FBI opens investigation into Orvix Capital cyber manipulation scheme. SEC subpoenas Orvix executives in IP theft inquiry. The press kit worked. So did the audit trail. I didn't scream. I documented. I didn't fight. I exposed. By the time the next board meeting was scheduled, I didn't walk in as a guest. I walked in with my name already engraved on the building's official IP charter. The same directors who once sat in silence now stood when I entered. They understood who built the thing they nearly lost. My chair at the table had been replaced. A small detail, but someone had thought to do it. Not just symbolic, structural. Brent was gone. Orvix's ownership stake was frozen pending legal review. And Evander, he resigned quietly, citing personal realignment. The team was watching me now, but not with suspicion. With respect. I opened my laptop. The PulseNet architecture pulsed, steady, cold, clean, untouched. I leaned forward and began the session like I had 100 times before. No ceremony, no victory speech, just work. Because there was still a system to protect one they'd tried to weaponize, erase, steal, but they couldn't. Because I was no longer their architect. I was their firewall, and my name was carved into every line.